I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Frank Herbert, Dune. Bending Not Breaking. The Legend of Korra, Book 1, Episode 4, The Voice in the Night.
Welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking, the live version, where we are not editing anything because that's too hard. We are excited to be back, and this is your host, Ben Pruitt, and we are back for another episode. We are back for episode 4 of The Legend of Korra, and last time we sat with the revelation and the uneasy truth, frankly, that oppression doesn't always arrive quietly. We talked about real harm, we talked about real fear, we talked about real inequality, and we talked about how it can give rise to movements that promise certainty, even when that certainty comes at a cost. Y'all, we've talked about certainty before on this podcast. You know that we don't like it. Basically, episode 3 asked us to wrestle with who gets to define justice when the world feels unbalanced, and what happens when fear becomes a tool instead of a warning sign. Speaking of fear, that is our lens today. And so we're moving into The Voice of the Night, Voice in the Night, excuse me, an episode that turns inward. Where the last chapter confronted power in public, this one explores what fear does in private. How it isolates us, distorts our perceptions, and even makes the strongest people question themselves. It becomes an environment of its own, one that can paralyze, manipulate, quietly reshape who we believe ourselves to be. So, friends, we're talking about fear today. I'm really excited. We're talking about water. That's our lens in terms of our element of choice in the Avatar cycle, element of connection, flow, resilience. How is that going to play with fear? We don't know, but we're going to find out on this episode of Bending, Not Breaking. As you may have surmised based off of who read our quote today, Rahul had the pleasure of choosing our lens. Rahul, give us insight as to why fear and what fear is to you.
So I chose this one because fear for Korra's character specifically is a pretty prominent through line through this episode. But I also felt that it was something that the other characters are also in relation to, specifically looking at Amon and introducing Tarlok. And I think that's something that we're going to get into with the discussion because I feel like both Amon and Tarlok, who are more related than we know right now, they have specific relationship to fear in that I think both of them at some respect are driven by their fears, but they also utilize fear as a tool to manipulate other people or to gain favor for their platform or their cause.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot involved in there's like a lot of similarities between the quote bad guys and the quote good guys in this episode. Before we dive into the episode, I want to get a little bit more clarity. You've kind of given the context as to why you chose it, but I want to get more clarity as to like what it is. What is fear? Because I think we talk about it on a daily basis. Even like 3 and 5 year olds are talking about like, oh, I'm scared, but like, what is it? I'm curious, like if we could all have a little bit clearer of a picture.
So I think to me, fear feels like this paralyzing kind of in the moment, undescribable feeling of something that is known to you, but also it is ever present,
Mhm.
even if it's not directly in front of you.
Yeah.
Like we see in the episode, Korra has nightmares of Amon. She's
Yep.
never had an interaction with him one-on-one, but she has dreams of having her bending being taken away.
Hmm.
So it's something that sort of pervades your waking moments, even if you're not directly in interaction with it.
Yeah. And sleeping ones, apparently, right? Um, cool. What about from, Kelly and Magathor, Maggie? I'm curious if there are other uh thoughts on fear around what it feels like or what it is for you.
I think there's not necessarily separate, but there's like the physical like fear response where you're in a dangerous situation, like your body is having this fight or flight response or, freeze or whatever. But then there's also like in our daily lives, there's fear of not measuring up. There's fear of, how can I overcome this obstacle? So I think there's kind of like a psychological fear that a lot of us have in ourselves about like the unknowns of the future, or at least I do. And but then there's also like being in an actual physical situation or being kind of face to face with a fear. I feel like there's different layers to how fear can be expressed.
Okay. Yeah. Anything new from you, Maggie, or different?
I think the only thing that's kind of popping up for me, which we see in the episode, is how the the emotional and physical fear that you're experiencing in your waking time, how then subconsciously your mind plays out those fears in your dreams. And I find that's really interesting too, because um, sometimes your brain will create these situations slash environments that you haven't been in, but you're fearful of. And then it causes you to experience it via dream. And that's how we see Korra experiencing the opening dream with Amon, right? And when you're in the dream, sometimes you know it's a dream, but sometimes you don't, right? And that's the fearful slash like scary part of it, is trying to then wake up from that nightmare, that night terror, the bad dream, and go, okay, I'm having like my elevated heart rate, I'm sweating, like my body is reacting as if I just experienced this because I experienced it in my head, even though I physically was not in any danger because I was asleep in bed.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, right, is to name what potentially hasn't been said explicitly is that fear is an emotion, right? It is something that we feel in our bodies physically and mentally and emotionally. And it's one of those things where ultimately I think most people would agree it's pretty unpleasant, right? It's a not fun experience. Now there are people who like chase adrenaline, but I think there's a difference between chasing something that you're truly fearful of and wanting to be scared in a safe way. Like we all know Sunshine from our prior host over here who loves horror films, loves to find that experience, but it's also consumed in a safe way, right? Where I'm in the safety of my home or in a movie theater where like there's an assumed safety implied that sometimes that film might be able to get past and make you feel as if you aren't safe. But it is one of those things where that is an interesting paradigm where sometimes people like that heightened feeling and sometimes people don't. Like me, I hate it. Um, and so I am curious about this, and I want to talk about how it is, as previously mentioned by several of you, like it is a tool that has been used by people in positions of power. And also, it is something that we see cripple our main character, right? And it sees us, we see how it guides even Mako, right, in this episode, and we see how it guides other characters throughout. So I will be curious to kind of talk about like what are the benefits, what are the non-benefits, what are the things that it does not do. Um, and I think one of the things that we need to like really wrap our head around too is that in a lot of therapeutic models, just for clarification, fear is considered a core emotion, meaning it is something that is not unique among cultures. It is something that every culture experiences in some way, shape, and form. And that is a really interesting thing to experience in the sense that this is a evolutionary experience as well, right? It's a biological there's a biological response to it. So I'm sure that'll come up in conversation. I'm sure we'll talk about it more. What I want to do is invite Rahul into one of the things that we intentionally do to make you feel scared, which is the 30-second recap. So I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds. How are you feeling? Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, on your mark, get set, go.
Korra is paralyzed by fear of Amon. Tarlok, an opportunistic councilman, wants to form a task force to take down the Equalists. Korra refuses to join, but Tarlok exploits her sense of bravado at a gala that eventually leads to her challenging Amon to a duel. Amon dismisses her and Korra admits her fears. Meanwhile, Mako begins dating Asami Sato, the daughter of a wealthy industrialist who agrees to sponsor the fire ferrets in a pro bending tournament.
3, 2, 1. Just letting that time go. Yeah,
Wow.
look at that. That is efficiency, folks. No need to be scared when you can be efficient. All right. Um, let's do it. What are the moments of fear that we want to address in the episode? Where do people want to start?
I feel like what jumps out to me is, we start right in the beginning of the episode with a nightmare that Korra is experiencing. And all of us having watched The Legend of Korra in its entirety have seen a lot of different facets of Korra's relationship with fear and how it changes over time. She experiences fear in different forms with all of the villains, Unalaq, Zahir, Kuvira, and it presents itself in different ways, but she also engages with it in different ways. And I'm curious, when you guys watched this episode, what stuck out to you the most as someone who has seen the show and knows what Korra's arc looks like and how she engages with fear now? How is it different than what we see throughout the show? Or, in what ways is it consistent? Or does it set up what we see going forward?
I have
Oh,
an
that
immediate answer to that, but does anybody else want to go?
no,
Because
you go for it, Ben.
okay. I see so much similarity and it changes, but it's so similar and rooted in I'm just thinking specifically in the fourth season with how Korra shuts down in relation to being able to take on Kuvira. But the difference is season 4 is rooted in historical trauma, right? Like she has experienced true terror. This is an anticipated trauma. And what we see in this first season is the projection of what she thinks would happen and the fear of what that would do to her. And we see her, the pattern that I'm noticing is that she internalizes it and does not share out. She is very private and unwilling to lean on other people. And we see her finally break at the end of this episode. And I think that moment is so crucial, right? Because we see how much and how scared she has been. And, I talked about this being a core emotion. One of the therapeutic modalities I work with talks about how you can't not feel the thing because if you don't, it's going to choose your decisions for you. And that's exactly what we see in this episode. We see how fear dictates all of her actions. And we see that happen in season 3 with Zahir. We see that happen in season 4 with Kuvira. I think again that we see a pattern of how Korra responds to fear that is rooted in the beginnings in this episode. So that's my initial response to your question of whether I see that showing up elsewhere in later, etc. Other thoughts? I'm done now.
Some of the notes I took, I wrote that instead of like facing her fears internally, like dealing with like the internal like why is this like why am I having this feeling like what can I do to like bolster myself? I feel like Cora really externalizes her control over the environment through like when she's fearful. And she really like tries to take like grab on to whatever she can to kind of push those fears down. But it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah,
Literally it doesn't.
yeah. I was honestly thinking since you and Maggie both do martial arts in your own on your own time, I was thinking about how much Cora relies on training in the face of fear. Like, because every time we get a picture of her doing anything, she's training. She is doing some sort of series of forms. She is doing a lot of relying on building her skills. And it might be a form of comfort. It might be a form of meditation. It might be all kinds of things. But to me, it feels like this is the way I know how to control things. And I'm curious from both of you what that feels like to have seen and kind of how it maps onto your experience.
Okay. I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think like physical training can be a form of trying to exercise, yeah, control over oneself, control over your body, potentially, at least in my experience, the desire to control others through being good, right? Being good at doing that. But the unfortunate, the quote unquote unfortunate thing is that your mindset, like how your mind is in those scenarios, is more important than probably your physical training. Because if you can't control your mind, you can't control this, like you can't control yourself, you can't control the situation. If you can't take, so I feel like that's what kind of what Cora misses, especially you see in this episode. She becomes extremely reactive, but then also like her senses, like almost like her intuition is dampened. She's not as capable when she's in this fearful mindset. So I think as far as like training martial arts, I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about your mindset and how to like not get swept up in fear or in reactivity.
Mm.
Anyway, Maggie, anything else about that?
For sure. Everything you said is fantastic. Just to kind of build on it, one of the things that we talk about a lot in the martial arts that we both study is having, so there's 3 stars. There's the physical, there's the mental, and then there's the emotional. And we talk a lot about in day-to-day training, a lot of times it feels like you're working more on the physical because you're doing forms and you're doing these series of uh, rep uh, repetition of movements and strikes, and you're building that core foundation. But at the same time, we're also really trying to create a space where we are pushing students out of their comfort zone so that way in a safe environment, they then have to learn how their body reacts and how their body feels under pressure, and then how to work through that while they're in an uncomfortable situation, but not in the sense where like they're in immediate danger, but it's creating those same fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? All of those emotions. We're trying to create that in a sense so that way in a real life situation, they don't totally freeze, right? We've already pushed them and put them under pressure to go, okay. And one of the things that I talk a lot about with my students, I'm like, the only thing you can control is you. So it's creating that mindset ahead of time and that emotional awareness of how do you want to be in a stressful situation, and what would you like to focus on? And one of the things that I talked about with a student this week, even because we did a stressful uh, experience in class, and then she had a very emotional response to it in class and then the following day. So we talked through it a little bit and talked about how sometimes, yes, you can like bow out and walk away, and that's acceptable. But she didn't do that. She stayed with it and felt the emotions and continued to move her body in a physical way. And then we mentally like picked through this situation and decompressed from it afterwards. And I think what we're missing from Korra here is she's not having that drawn back, like big picture look of let me feel my emotions in a safe space, like while I'm training with Tenzin and while I'm working on my forms. She's using the physical side of her study and her avatarness to block the rest of her emotions or basically push them aside. And then we see how that bubbles up and a volcano basically explodes out of her because all of that emotion and mental struggle has just been compressed and pushed down, and then it has to erupt because there's nowhere else for it to go.
And that's exactly the framework of you can't go around it, you can't go under it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. And like this is exactly right. Like how would you like to experience this? Because you're gonna have to at some way, shape, or form. And we see Cora get to the point where she doesn't have a choice any longer. Instead, like she had the opportunity, Tenzin asked her and sat her down earlier and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And she's like, "Nope, I'm good." Because there's a an associated shame, right? Oftentimes when these core emotions come up, what happens is society dictates that they are less allowed, not allowed, they are allowed, or our families or our cultures dictate whether it's okay or not to feel that thing. And in this case, the avatar is not allowed to be scared. Of course not. And so that leads to inhibitory emotions, which we all experience as shame, guilt, anxiety. And we see all kinds of that in this episode. And so what we see is her trying to manage these inhibitory emotions rather than just letting herself feel the fear. And so I do want to capitalize on that as a concept, but I would rather make sure we're talking about all kinds of different moments. So I'm wondering if there are other moments we want to transition to as we continue to talk about this lovely, super light subject of fear.
Well, really quick, based on what you guys were discussing, one of the things that came to mind for me is because we spent 3 seasons talking about The Last Airbender, is
Yeah.
talking about how Korra and Aang each respectively engaged with fear at, approximately similar times in each of their shows, like beginning of the first season, because each of them, their different backgrounds inform how they engage with fear. With Aang, he found out he was the Avatar when he was a child. It was younger than he was supposed to, but he already had an identity that was not being the Avatar. And so when he finds out that he is the Avatar, his new identity as the Avatar comes into it collides with his old identity, and he feels like he loses the sense of who he was before. And his response to that is almost to push away his old life. So he runs away from the temple. And I
Mm.
feel like with Korra,
Before you
sorry,
move
Ben.
on, I think that that's a really interesting paradigm, and it also illustrates how perception is playing a role here, right? Because he was always the Avatar. He just had the assumption that he was someone else, right? And so I think part of the identity crisis is this fear of, oh no, what will I become? And how is that going to align with who I am? And I think all of his teachers would have said, it doesn't change anything about who you are. you are the exact same person. You just now realize that you have this new thing. And I think that that's a really crucial point. Uh, but go to Korra now. Your turn.
Yeah, and with Korra, she finds out she's the Avatar very, very young. So that immediately becomes a centralizing point of her identity that even if, people were to deny it, it shapes how people interact with her. The White Lotus immediately becomes a surrounding force in her life, and her Avatar training is who she is. And so now I think it makes perfect sense that when she feels fear that is also inherent to threatening her identity as the Avatar, she does what she is familiar with, which is train. Because as far as we know, Korra doesn't really have any other hobbies besides Avatar training. She doesn't really do anything else. Like Aang plays games with the other airbending kids
Yeah.
until he becomes the Avatar. Korra doesn't really have that to our knowledge.
No,
She
I love
grew up
it.
relatively alone.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, as we see the show progress, a lot of the fear that she feels very central to our identity as the Avatar. We see here her fear is Amon taking her bending away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then later on in season 4, the vision that she repeatedly sees is her in the Avatar state. It's core to her identity and the fear of her own power and how that can be used to exploit her or that she might like lose a sense of her responsibility
Yeah.
as the Avatar.
And we talked about that last episode too, and maybe the episode before that. But like part of the Amon's whole trajectory is creating this, oh no, what happens when I lose this? And we see it's in the revelation. Korra is immediately struck with like, oh shit, my whole life is on the line. So yeah, I think one of the things that we kind of brushed on that I want to kind of clarify here is this idea. We talked about it last episode too, but the idea of the mask that we see Amon wear. But a lot of my work surrounds the concept of masking, and we all do that. It's largely considered a neurodivergent thing, but we all mask. We all put on a brave face, or like that's a form of a mask, right? And I think what we see in this is different types of masks in this episode. That is what you were pointing to earlier, Rahul. But while Amon is literally wearing a mask, right? We also see that TLOK is trying to use a uh, almost like cultural mask of saying, look, we have things under control. The avatar's on our side, which is a mask, right? Or Korra, who is like saying, I can beat anyone. I'm stronger than you, and I'm going to come fight me. Clearly a mask. We see how terrified she is. And so I'm curious about how um this like when is this actually serving the person? Because it's to me it doesn't feel like it's serving Korra. It does feel like it's serving Amon. I don't know that it's serving TLOK in a positive or negative way, or if it's serving the public in a positive or negative way. One could potentially argue either way, but I'm curious about perception of like when is it useful to mask and when is it not, in especially in response to fear. It's a big question. Sorry.
Mm. It's useful when it keeps you in a position of power. It keeps you having the upper hand over who you need to, I guess, who you feel you need to have the upper hand over.
Who
So I
you
feel
trying to
like,
manipulate, huh?
I will not be answering that question. On a daily basis, I mean, I wouldn't say that, yeah, I feel like manipulation is unfortunately, like for some people is like a way of life. And I feel like I grew up with people who that was part of their way of life. So I feel like I've learned a lot about that. And I feel like in this episode, like the way that Tarlok acts, like I don't know if we would say like Korra's wearing, well, she kind of is wearing her fear on her sleeve. I feel like Tarlok is very keyed into like the subtler emotions between Tenzin and Korra and
Hmm.
using that to his advantage. Even though he never, like, I guess, sees Korra in a state of fear, I feel like he immediately keys into her personality, keys into what drives her and what she's scared of, and he exploits that
Oh, he's
like
clearly able to provoke her into
masterclass in it at
right?
the gala. Like,
Yeah.
and it's so sad because part of you is like, they should have seen this coming. Like Korra should know better. Like, people should, but that's not the point. Obviously, that's not the point because he is basically running circles around them using, even Tenzin says, watch out, right? And it's not enough because he knows exactly, like Tarlok knows exactly what to do. And I feel
Hmm.
like it's because he's intimately familiar with that experience, probably having been done to him, having done it to others before.
Yeah.
He's so slimy. I feel like I wish I could almost watch without knowing what follows, because literally the whole gala like gave me the ick so bad.
Oh,
Every
yeah.
character
Like,
at that gala, I was like, you.
but it's interesting because, and so it begs the question, right? Like, I let's one of the concepts of the pod is that we are like, what is the most generous assumption we can make of the character, right? And it feels as though Tarlok is doing this not to manipulate Korra so that he can be in control and be the one who's like reaping all the glory. The generous assumption is that the public will benefit from this. He believes the public will benefit from this. And the generous assumption is that he thinks this is truly the right thing to do, not only for his own benefit, because he believes he will be better in a better position of leadership because he thinks that's what's right. But I do think he believes this is the right thing to do, right? Like I see
But
you all
the
nodding.
way that the way that he talks to the council, he's manipulating them as well. He immediately uses their fear. He says it's going to be next, it'll be your friends and your family who are kidnapped and have their bending taken away. So like not even when he starts this entire like line of we need to make a task force, he already is not being not acting in good faith. He's already employing like I can't even think of the right word, like fallacies, like preying on their fears.
But
So I feel like I cannot, I don't know, maybe it's
so
just because I know what happens, but I cannot see him as a good faith character. I don't think he acts in good faith.
I don't know. I genuinely believe that people who are like this, even though they employ terrible tactics, think they're doing it for the right reasons. That's my belief. And so like I do agree with everything you're saying. Like there is not a part of me that is denying the fact of what you're saying, but except that I think he believes that he's doing it for the greater good.
Yes, maybe. I don't know. I don't think he knows what I don't think his,
I guess one of the questions that I had throughout this episode is we find out later on that Tarlok and Amon actually know Atak are brothers. Does Tarlok have any suspicion that Amon is actually his brother at this point? And whether he does or not, is he driven by a sense of fear for himself and his own identity as a bender? And is that partially what is driving him to go after the Equalists so hard? Or is it purely about his station in the city and in the government and holding on to control and power.
My gut tells me it's about control and power, right? My gut says he thinks the city would be better off if he was in charge. That's in the best way to do that is to stay in charge and manipulate the public. Um, so it's just one of those things where uh yeah, I just think it's wild. So that is my thought.
Ben, can you reiterate your question on the implication of masking as a form of fear? Can you just ask that again? Basically, like
Yeah,
your big question was?
I think the short version of it is people mask for different reasons. When does masking serve the person who is masking? And when doesn't it serve them? Because
Mhm.
I think we see several versions of that. Like we see it serve Amon, and I think Kelly spoke to that, where it serves you if you're trying to maintain power, right? But when we see Korra mask and put on this bravado, is it serving her? Is it like, is the preservation of the image of the avatar worth putting that mask on? And for other instances, etc.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. Um, because the feelings that I was having right away, and I suppose I wasn't really thinking of Iman mask because that is it's a physical mask, but not in it's both physical and emotional because he's physically hiding his face and his identity to create this form of power and hiding that he is in fact a bender. And right, there's all of these layers. But what I was thinking more so is on the lines of when neurodivergent people mask, or even people who aren't neurodivergent and are masking in the sense of trying to not show that they're afraid, or like whatever the situation is that they're masking to get through it. My body is having the reaction and the thoughts of it's it's not good or it's not helpful. Like I can't think of a form of masking that, unless you're trying to create the power dynamic, like Kelly mentioned with Amon, where that is helpful for your body to deal with the stressful situation. Because when you mask, that causes more buildup and it causes more emotional strain. And then you have to essentially work through all of that energy that you put into masking. And Ben, you can speak to this more because your knowledge and time spent with trauma and just existing and how humans process emotion is much more than ours because of your line of work. But one of the things that's coming up for me is I think part of the reason we see such a this explosive volcano of emotion that Cora deals with is because she's masking, and it's literally causing, in addition to her already dealing with a very traumatic situation at a young age, it's just again creating more pressure and pushing all of that down, which is then going to cause this catalytic moment later on.
Yeah, I think this is a very nuanced question, right? And I think you're pointing to exactly why it's nuanced. Um, my belief is that is generally to agree, and is that most, if not 99% of the time, it's going to be harmful, because it is a form of I need to fit in to this situation rather than trust my authenticity and belong regardless of people's judgment. And it is essentially positioning the outcome of the relational experience on the other person, and therefore putting all the agency on the other person to deem whether I'm worthy or not. And I'm, dumbing that down a little bit, but it feels as though most of the time people mask because they are scared. And sometimes people mask because their safety is on the line. And so for me, it's how do we bridge the gap between, oh, I have to mask because this is an unsafe situation for me, and oh, this feels unsafe. I'm scared, but I'm actually not safe. That's my alarm, smoke alarm going off when there's not actually fire.
Mm.
And so it's this really fine line of discernment of am I actually in danger or am I not in danger? And that to me is when it's beneficial versus when it's not. It is a beneficial adaptive process if it keeps you safe. It is not beneficial or adaptive if it is preventing you from living your authentic life and preventing you from being yourself in a position where your safety is not actually threatened. Does that make sense? Does that
I
track?
think I think so.
Mm.
All of the things you say, like all of those are clicking in. I suppose the part where I don't even know if pushback is the right word, but the part that makes me question the masking in the sense of to get through when you're feeling unsafe because there is an unsafe environment.
Mhm.
Um, I think what my brain is saying, but is masking the tool that we should like that we want to be using, right? Because there are other tools to get out of an unsafe environment. So I suppose it's more of my brain going, granted, you have to be in situations either in therapy or something where like those tools are then being given to you because if you don't understand how to use different tools, masking is probably the only way to do it. But I think what's happening in my brain and body is that if there are other tools that you have been presented with, that then those should be used before masking, because then masking is going to have more implications physically, mentally, and emotionally later on as then you go back to unpack. Does that make sense?
100%. I just think that we don't learn them.
Yes.
Mm.
We only know what we see, and our culture sees this, right?
Yeah.
As evidenced by Cora's just like immediate instinctual reaction, right, to this, right? The more unsettled she gets, the more she keeps to herself, the
Yeah.
more she hides because of the fear of judgment. That what does it mean if the avatar is scared? And so the perpetual driver of shame, anxiety, and guilt, these inhibitory emotions, are going to lead us to mask. And that's why it's just such a common thing. And that's why it's the first tool that people go to, is because that's the only thing they know how to do. So, yes, if there are other tools, let's learn how to use those.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we can fault people for not using those tools when they don't have them.
Yes, absolutely. That was the part where I was like, if we have the tools, we should be implementing those tools. But then because as a society and a culture, there's that failure of giving the community those tools, then that's where it continues to perpetuate.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. There's a lot of other moments of fear in this episode. Are there ones that people are feeling pulled to discussing? Let's talk about Tenzin. There's two moments in this that we've kind of briefly touched in on already. So there's the middle of the episode, Tenzin, that comes up and says, "Hey, you're not acting like your normal self. Why don't you sit next to me and tell me all about it?" Uh, and she's like, "Nope, I'm all set." Um, and the end, in contrast, where she is crying and pours everything out. She's just had this really traumatic experience. And there's a shift here where something about the fear is making it so that I now don't have a choice to say it, or now I'm something shifts in why she's willing to divulge to Tenzin. And I wonder if we can articulate the main difference here. Is it that it's just so much more that she can't contain it, or is it something more nuanced than that? And I'm genuinely curious. I don't know.
I was actually thinking about this scene and I was thinking that almost like because Amon doesn't take away her bending at that moment, that actually increases her fear because I feel like it put her like closer to the precipice that she's afraid of falling over. And I mean, I think it is ultimately like she has so much built up, like not only like emotions, but like literally like chemicals in her body, like she has to release in some way. And I think this moment happens to be like the first, Tenzin's kind of, I mean, he's not a safe person, but he's a safe person to her, I believe, in some capacity. So I think that it just like the cork pops at that moment.
Yeah. And I think what you said is important, right? Like, not only is Amon showing up in this moment and leaving her intact more scary, but what it does is it proves to her that like all of the effort she's put into trying to master herself throughout this episode, all of the training she has been doing didn't mean anything. And so in a way, it was like a confirmation that she didn't have the control she was putting on, so to speak. Um, is I think what I heard you pointing to and what
Yeah,
it feels like for me.
I think you said it better actually, but definitely
Well, I mean, I don't know about better, but
differently.
I also think going back to the idea of the mask, Korra uses this mask of bravado to the public to reinforce her own sense of capability and strength. Uh, Initially, when she rejects Tarlok's offer to join the task force, it feels like just sort of like trying to bypass addressing this, but then she overcompensates once she has to face it. And I think for Korra as a character, when she puts on this mask and she, puts out a challenge to Amon, if the challenge goes through and she is successful, it reinforces the strength of that mask of capability for
yeah,
her. But then when it doesn't work out, what does she have to reckon with? Like she has to face the fact that this outward mask is in fact a mask.
yeah,
And I think she trusts Tenzin enough to engage with that.
yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Well, and it's also something that this is the first time she actually says it out loud. Like she says, "I'm so scared," and I think acknowledging it, as we've been kind of alluding to, is a form of control over it than the perceived control she has had by putting on this bravado. Because we see it change how she moves and acts in the next episode, right? So in a way, it's just this weird like tension that we all experience between, oh, I'm scared, but I don't want to tell anybody, but also like if I just talk about it, things will get better. And again, like we were talking about this about a cartoon. But when we acknowledge that our fears in quote real life are ultimately feel way more threatening than talking about, Korra, a person who, while she exists in my heart and mind, doesn't actually exist. Um, and so it's just a very different, it's easier to talk about fear when it's not right in front of you.
Mm.
I have a question for the group as like a contemplative part. So one of the things I was noticing, especially this watch through with the lens of fear, is the reaction the reporters have at the gala and then post gala when essentially they're asking, as an avatar, what are you gonna do? Blah, blah, blah. The how threatening do you think Amon is? And one of the things that I was noticing this time is the just um responsibility that they're putting on this, 16, 17-year-old of they're all adults, and yet they're also aware from, I think it was episode 1, right? When Korra announced, or like they made the announcement that the Avatar was coming to continue her studies in Republic City. And I think it's just interesting because basically there's this child, this teenager who's here to study, and yet all of a sudden there's this public outcry slash demanding of, well, what are you going to do about this really scary individual that is twice slash triple your age, and yet they're looking to this teenager and they're putting this immense amount of pressure on this young student and this young avatar. And thinking back to, like, we know that Aang was young, but it was a much different situation, I feel like, for a young Aang versus young Korra, because most of the world didn't know that he was the Avatar slash still around. So they weren't expecting him to do things, and he kind of just came out of nowhere, right? And was like, I've defeated, the Phoenix King. And then with Zuko's help, things have been, they started to restore things. And then even with Republic City, with the flashbacks that we get in this episode and episodes that continue, we see how, as a still young but in his 30s, the more diplomatic side of Aang. And I'm just curious what, or if you have any thoughts, if you guys have any thoughts on how the citizens slash reporters are addressing slash creating more fear in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the things that comes top of mind to me, especially when comparing Aang and Korra, is how the mediascape is so much different during Korra's time. And
So,
we're seeing like a totally like an extreme of that right now, where as soon as people have a common place to like get news, or like people have a more public platform, immediately people can sort of externalize like their sense of fear and put that responsibility, lump it all together and put it onto one person. And then that position of authority becomes so much more overwhelming in a way. And when that's a child, like we can only imagine how insane that is. And I feel like one of the things that this brings to mind for me is the third Hunger Games book, Mockingjay, where Katniss has a very public persona as the Mockingjay and responsibilities that she carries with that. And there's Katniss the revolutionary, but there's also Katniss the media personality, and those are in conflict with one another. So I'd be curious what's going on through Korra's head during these moments where, she's engaging with fear in her own time, but then she's thrust in front of reporters
mm-hmm.
and has to engage with that fear in her head while also, putting on a public persona.
The thought I had to your question, Maggie, was I question whether these reporters' questions were their questions or Tarlok's. I think that they were briefed specifically to pressure her into this. And I might be wrong. It might be that he was just masterfully able to read the room and see that this is what the public craved. But to me it seems more likely that he carefully constructed this to pressure her. And I think that's to Kelly's point earlier, that this is a specific play that was put on Korra to get her to make this decision in his favor. Um, and yet, to Maggie, your point, I also think that there are reporters that would have been like this and would have gone down this route without prompting. And so it's a mixture of like a yes and, right? Of ultimately, I think that the media and the questioning and the public use of media is absolutely playing a role in all of this. And I think that they were guided and directed personally. All right. Well, you got to stop at the peak of the fun, folks. We're gonna transition into the next segment of our podcast. Not because there isn't any more to talk about, but because we want to keep you listening. And so we're going to talk about our next segment, which is Twee and La, our namesake segment from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and talk about the push and pull balance. What pushes us away, what pulls us in, and I would love to hear folks' thoughts.
So,
I think, oh, go ahead,
yeah,
Rahul. You got
no,
it.
no, you go.
No you, no me, no you.
I think my push is feel like Sami's dad, uh he just gives me the ick this time around. And I feel like it's probably because I know what happens. But even I was trying to just watch with like, not really thinking about it, but the way that he's like maybe it's meant I mean, I feel like now that I'm watching it, maybe the dialogue is meant to be almost like satirical. I don't know. He's like, with one selfless loan, I did all of this. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you're so suspicious. Um, you're not, no, I don't like you. And then my pull is, oh wait, I just had it. Oh, all of the animations of Korra's face in this episode, I kind of loved because they really did like the number on trying to show like after like Tarlok like basically traps her into the task force, like her face there, like there's not really like a lot of moments where she's giving off a very stoic vibe, and I kind of like that. I'd like that that's kind of showing on her face how she's having all of these like really like mixed feelings and like uncertainty.
Mm, I love it. Excellent. Wonderful. Other pushes and pulls.
So one of the pushes, I mean, there's a couple, but specifically just Tarlok's manipulation slash exploiting Korra, especially because he is a male in power and she is a female that is a minor and underage, and so much of that just brings up multiple icks, and then we
You
see
don't
how
like
he
that? I don't
nope.
understand. I don't
Yeah, I know.
what don't you like about that?
It's really surprising that I find that uncomfortable, and especially how he shows up at Tenzin and Pema's house at dinner and then
Right?
sits really close to Korra. Like I noticed that this time that the whole family is spread decently apart. Like there's plenty of space between, and then he's like sitting on top of Korra basically. Blech. So
Sorry.
so
That
much of an ick with that. But then the the pull that I had with this episode is the little bit of backstory we get with Mako's scarf and why he always is wearing it, and how it's the one piece of clothing that he has that's left of his dad, and it's how he remembers his dad and keeps him, you know,
yeah.
basically close to his heart because he's always wearing the scarf around, his neck, and that's a very vulnerable spot, right? It's similar to like a necklace or a talisman, something like that.
I love it. I love it. So good. Excellent.
Yeah, my push is pretty similar to Maggie's, and it's knowing now that Tarlok and Amon are actually brothers. It's kind of weird. They're like the I know that there's not really like a feud between them right now, but just knowing like them in their respective positions and how they are acting in relation to Korra, who is like a child, it is just very weird to me because both of them are kind of exploiting her sense of fear, and it's just very gross and slimy. Um, my poll, well, first off, to Maggie's point about Mako's scarf, a question I have, if any of you have watched Attack on Titan, I'm curious, like just an open question
Mikasa!
between Mako and Mikasa, whose scarf do you think smells worse? Because both of them wear scarves multiple seasons.
What a question. What
No.
a wild question.
Yeah,
Okay, I feel like Mako's, not gonna lie.
No, absolutely not.
I feel like Mikasa definitely probably cleans hers.
I think Mako's more likely to clean his scarf than Mikasa is.
Really?
Yeah, I
No,
agree.
I feel like Mikasa's like way too like she's too careful about her personhood.
I disagree.
Wow.
I think Mikasa is
She's like,
yeah,
whatever, man. She just
yeah,
not thinking about it. Okay, I mean that could
yeah.
be true. I'm glad
That
that we'll never know. I don't want to know.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, my poll is the scene that we see underneath Aang's island where there's this fight that's entirely in the dark that's just illuminated by Korra's fire. And because listening to the commentary of this episode, they actually had an idea for The Last Airbender where it would be a fight between Aang and Zuko that's in the dark, that's entirely lit by Zuko's fire. And
Whoa.
they couldn't do it, so they brought it into this show.
It's dope.
But
Love
as
it.
like a sub pull to that, one of the other things they mentioned in the commentary is that this island and the statue by Aang, one of the ideas that they had was the statue was actually metal bent by Toph.
Mhm.
Because one of the things we see is her like doing more sculptures, especially with sand and things like that. But
Yeah.
transitioning that to metal, maybe she's the one that made the statue.
Oh, neat. Super cool. Look at that deep lore. I love it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah, we see that in Imbalance. She just is erecting statues of herself all the time, which is really funny in the comics. But so for me, one of the things that I found was I was really interested in the Asami and Mako dynamic in this episode because Asami is so just like unassuming and is so like unaware and yet also aware of her privilege. And it's so interesting because she's just like, oh yeah, oh my God, let me take you to this beautiful restaurant. Oh, don't worry about it. And then he gets this full like makeover that I would be like, oh hell no, I did not come here for that. Like I thought you were gonna give me a jacket. I didn't know you were gonna get like put me in like a whole like anyway. So uh that was a little weird. But what I like about it is that Asami is, from her perspective, very generous. And I think it's really beautiful that she's just like, oh, you helped me. Let me do as much as I can for you. And I think that that's just really nice. And that made me feel like nice and warm inside, even though I wouldn't have wanted what she gave me. And um, my push, and this is mostly because of the amount of regret I know Mako would have, is if he got the tattoo that he said he would be willing to get on his chest, he would have regretted that thing for the rest of his life. Like, and you know what I mean? Like this, I'll tattoo your logo on my chest.
Ugh.
And what we learn is so like contra to this that I imagine like the amount of betrayal, the amount of like that would happen is just like that makes me nervous. So I think about people who like tattoo like Harry Potter things on their bodies, and then the amount of regret they have for putting, J.K. Rowling affiliated things and how many cover-ups there have been on that. And here I am rocking a full-on Avatar sleeve praying that Mike and Brian don't do anything stupid in the next couple of years. But like it's one of those things where there's a statement that is made when you take a company logo versus like a character. I feel like I can justify these characters regardless of whether bad things happen, but um yeah, I just found that to be like, ugh, so
Mm,
that landed harder than I thought it was going to. So anyway, that was my push and pull with Mako and
yeah.
its nice little arc. Um Okay, folks. We've been making great progress. We've been talking about balance. We've been staying balanced by talking about things we liked, things we disliked. And now we want to relate this to the avatar cycle and making sure that we're, unlike Korra, using all of the elements at our disposal, and focusing on water. And so, water is our element today. And Rahul, you have chosen an activity, a little focus sesh, a little thing, the elemental focus. What did you choose? Why? What are we doing? How do we do it? Give me the good details.
I chose Let It Flow, which is to close by naming one feeling or thought you'll let move through you instead of holding on to. Um, quote, a mini emotional release that mirrors water cleansing nature. Water's
Let it
cleansing.
flow, let it flow.
And, I just thought it was neat.
Yeah. Okay, so what will you model for us? What this might look like?
I feel like for me, thinking about fear throughout this episode, I'm also thinking about how I hold on to fear. Because in many ways, the last few years, I have taken like a few of my sort of deeper fears and have made a point of facing them. Um, for example, getting into climbing, even though I'm afraid of heights. But there are other fears that are harder to face and they're more like circumstantial. There's the fear of a loss of opportunity. There's a fear of getting an opportunity and screwing it up. There's a fear of losing someone or something. And some of those fears can be pretty paralyzing.
Hmm.
And again, they're amorphic enough that you can't, it's not something that you can say like, oh, I'm going to do this to combat this fear directly. But I think they are the fears that you can address by saying something like, the Serenity Prayer and
Hmm.
basically saying, I'm going to control what I can control, and anything else that I'm unable to control is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, and not, trying to hold too tightly onto things that I have no influence over whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you took the low-hanging fruit with fear being the answer here. But I like I think you're naming something that's really valuable, right? And so yeah, I part of me is remembering the way the quote you offered us from Dune in the beginning of like don't ignore it, let it move through you, and then watch where it went because that will kind of lead you to see who you are, right? Um, I'm of course paraphrasing, but it feels very apropos to this activity you're offering us. Um, and I feel the same way. I think about like discomfort, or not just because discomfort can be rooted in many different things. It can be rooted in fear, it can be rooted in like uh, uh anxiety, it can be rooted in anger, it can stem from a lot of things. And so I'm thinking about how to do this, how to let it move through me. And I think the way to do it is to notice it, because I think oftentimes um to Korra watching this episode, it feels like I'm trying to ignore it or I'm trying to avoid it. And I think it's just I want to acknowledge when I feel uncomfortable. And I think the way I want to do it is just like let it flow by naming it. I'm feeling uncomfortable. That feels icky to me. And then rather than avoiding that and trying to just like move on and not address it, I think I want to just mirror that cleansing nature by if you can name it, you can tame it, like that kind of a deal. So I think that's what I'm coming up with in response to this is how do I notice and name the thing that I'm feeling, which is some discomfort in this case. Maggie, Kelly, thoughts?
Okay. Geez, there's a couple of things I'm grappling in my life right now that have been weighing on me kind of heavily. I think I'm gonna go with maybe, I don't know if it's more like controversial, but for me personally, I'm releasing it, that I'm not responsible for my parents' choices.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and it is not my responsibility to fix something for them.
mm. Say it again for the people in
Yeah.
the back.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's really bad right now, but near constantly almost. But yeah, I need to release that so badly. I'm allowed to love them and help them in ways that are not detrimental to me, but I'm not responsible for them.
Hell yeah. Let it flow. Let it flow,
Mm.
girl. Yes. Okay. Uh, awesome. Okay, Maggie, anything from you?
One of the things visually that's popping up in my brain is just making sure that as I like check in with my own emotions as I deal with stressful situations, that similar to what I talked about, how like Cora kept suppressing. So like making sure that even if in that specific situation, like that's not the time to process it or let the emotions out. But then setting time aside later when I'm in my own environment or like in a situation where then I can pull it apart, pick it apart, and just making sure that I'm not, you know, essentially like clogging, if we're thinking more of like the water idea, like making sure that the drain isn't clogged, right? Like cleaning that out
Yeah.
and allowing the emotions to flow through in a healthy way, but then understanding that sometimes there's going to be moments where you can't process it or you can't deal with that emotion in that exact moment, but then taking the space and the time and then, sitting
Yeah,
with it at a later date or journaling it or doing an art form through it.
I love it. Yeah. Okay. Well, listeners, this is your opportunity to let it flow. Take a minute to process. We all gave a very different answer, so I'm curious how
Mm.
you'll take this and give yourself a minute to, wonder how will you let it flow. Um, and then also, you know how we end every episode, so we're gonna make sure we're doing it the same way. We are grateful, and we're gonna practice showing that gratitude by naming some characters that we're thankful for from the episode and kind of giving a little detail as to why we chose that character. Who wants to share who they're grateful for first to prevent you from being the copycat?
I think this is becoming a recurring thing, but before someone else says them, I'm gonna say Tenzin because when Tarlok visits Air Temple Island and invites Korra to join the task force, I think Tenzin immediately thinks that Korra's answer is going to be yes, because that's very much in character for her. But when she says no, I need to focus on my airbending training, he is surprised by that, but he also recognizes that there's something deeper to this answer,
Yeah.
and he is willing to explore that with Korra in a safe and approachable way that allows her to open up at the end of the episode to him.
Yep.
So, um, constantly Tenzin shows growth as a character that, he is a approachable figure of like both attachment and like influence that, I think that's so valuable to have. So constantly props to him.
Yeah. I love how you said it set the stage for the end, right? Like his noticing this is what allows the end of this episode to happen. So I'm a big fan of that. Well done. I appreciate that. Others.
I'm grateful for Asami and how, upon hearing that something that she is a fan of and a supporter of, finds a way to allow the team to continue to do their pro bending in their championship, right? And then is just very open and willing to share with the wealth that she was basically born into, right? Because by the time the Asatomobile was out and about, timing wise, it seems like Asami was already, or like born into the infrastructure that was already built with
Yep.
everything, right? So she's grown up in a very privileged way and yet is still a very genuine person and willing to do her best to, take Mako out to a fancy restaurant that he's never been to and then supply the dress code. And then upon hearing that the team that she enjoys watching can't compete because it's a money issue, then like goes behind, not behind their back, but like does the work to create that sponsorship that they need in order to compete and is just invested in um that side of things, not just because she ran over Mako with her bike.
Yeah. Speaking of which, if you want to sponsor Bending Not Breaking, we will accept that sponsorship unless you support things that we don't support. So, um, anyway, just that's a side.
Amen.
Yeah. uh, but okay. Uh, next.
I'm gonna go Iki because she just clocks Tarlac so fast. And I love that. Love an honest reading.
Just unabashed like commentary. Yeah.
Yes.
Big fan. Um, I'm, you know, I wish that we got more lines from Pema. The only like there are no spoken lines from Pema, but what we do get is a very awesome look at Tenzin in response to Tarlok entering the room and Tenzin not kind of pushing back on this. Um, and she just like glares at him, and Tenzin is just like, "Well, sorry." And I really value the way that Pema is shaping this family. And her values become clear in this moment, and what she cares about becomes clear. And I think that's really valuable for Tenzin as well as for the people that she surrounds and influences. So I'm a big fan of Pema. That's my person.
Mm,
Um,
love it.
let's hear justice for Pima. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Uh, friends, family. I doubt you're listening, family, but so it goes. Uh, listeners, you have been invested in a wonderful episode of Bending Not Breaking, the live version. And again, we are super not active on our social medias, but you can find us on them and on Patreon at BNB_pod if you want to check in and listen in. We have had quite a few free Patreon people joining recently, and so apparently people are listening, which is fun. So I just invite you to check it out. If you're curious about getting a bunch of backlogged episodes, there are a lot on the Patreon available to you if you want to go listen to things that were never put on air. And so BNB_pod, and big thanks to everyone who is listening and to our lovely co-hosts for making this possible. And I think that's a wrap. Until next time, be well.